The morning of June 6, 1944, somewhere over the Cotentin Peninsula, Staff Sergeant Robert Murphy of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment felt the C-47's deck plates shudder beneath his boots. German flak bursts lit the pre-dawn darkness in orange blooms. He checked his equipment one final time. Musette bag, reserve chute, main chute harness. And strapped across his chest, folded stock collapsed against the receiver, an M1A1 Carbine with 3 15-round magazines taped together in his jump jacket. Across the fuselage, he could see Private James Eads, 19 years old, gripping his own carbine with white knuckles. The kid had asked Murphy 2 days before the jump whether the carbine would be enough. Murphy had told him what the armourer sergeants always said. It's not about the rifle. It's about putting rounds downrange fast when you hit the ground. The green light flashed. Murphy stood, hooked his static line, and jumped into darkness over occupied France. 3 hours later, Murphy found himself in a Hedgerow firefight south of Sainte-Mère-Église with 4 other paratroopers he'd gathered in the chaos of the drop. Across a narrow dirt road, behind an earthen berm thick with vegetation, German Grenadiers from the 91st Luftland Division were firing carabiner 98k rifles with methodical precision. Each shot cracked sharp and clear, bolt worked. Another round. The Germans were taking their time, aiming carefully, conserving ammunition exactly as their training demanded. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Murphy flipped the carbine's selector, rose above the Hedgerow base, and fired 15 rounds in approximately 6 seconds. Semi-automatic fire. Each trigger pull sending another .30 caliber round across the road. He dropped, changed magazines, moved 3 meters left, rose again, fired another burst. Eads was doing the same from Murphy's right. Then Corporal Vincent from the left. The Germans stopped shooting. Murphy heard shouting in German, confused shouting, then the distinctive sound of men moving through vegetation, moving away from the road. The firefight lasted perhaps 90 seconds. Murphy had fired 45 rounds. The Germans, by his count, had managed perhaps a dozen shots total before withdrawing. This was not how rifle combat was supposed to work. This violated every principle of marksmanship and fire discipline that defined infantry warfare for the past 2 centuries. And it was about to become the new reality across Normandy. The carabiner 98 Kurz was not simply a rifle. It was the physical embodiment of German military philosophy regarding infantry combat. Its development traced back to the Gewehr 98, the standard German infantry rifle of the First World War. Itself a refinement of designs stretching to the 1880s. When the Versailles Treaty restricted German military development after 1918, the Weimar Republic's defense establishment worked within those constraints to develop what would become the Kar98k. Adopted officially in 1935, the Kar98k represented evolutionary perfection of the bolt-action rifle concept. It fired the 7.9 2x57mm Mauser cartridge, a round with a muzzle velocity of approximately 1100 meters per second. The effective range for a trained soldier was 500 meters. Expert marksmen could engage targets reliably at 800 meters or beyond. The weapon was 43.5 inches long, weighed just over 8 pounds unloaded, and fed from a 5-round internal magazine loaded via stripper clips. Every aspect of the design emphasized precision and reliability. The Mauser M98 bolt action was among the strongest ever created, with dual locking lugs and a third safety lug that prevented catastrophic failure even if the primary lugs sheared. The trigger broke clean at approximately 4 pounds of pressure. The iron sights, a simple V-notch rear and barleycorn front, were graduated to 2,000 meters, though practical accuracy obviously fell far short of that theoretical maximum. German infantry training centered on marksmanship. A grenadier spent weeks on the range learning to achieve first-round hits at ranges up to 300 meters. Training emphasized breath control, trigger squeeze, and the mechanical rhythm of the bolt action. Load 5 rounds. Acquire target. Breathe. Squeeze. Bolt up, back, forward, down. Next target. The ideal was disciplined fire. Aimed fire. Every shot counting because ammunition was a resource to be conserved, not expended. This doctrine had proven itself across multiple conflicts. German infantry, armed with Kar98k rifles, had overwhelmed Poland in 1939, smashed through France in 1940, and driven deep into the Soviet Union in 1941 and 42. The rifle worked. It killed at ranges where enemy weapons were ineffective. It survived conditions that would disable more complex mechanisms. German soldiers trusted the Kar98k absolutely. The United States Army entered the Second World War with a fundamental problem regarding infantry weapons. The standard rifle, the M1 Garand, was arguably the finest battle rifle in the world. Semi-automatic, firing the powerful .30-06 cartridge from an 8-round en-bloc clip, it gave American infantrymen a decisive firepower advantage over bolt-action armed opponents. General George Patton would famously call it the greatest battle implement ever devised. But the Garand had limitations. It weighed 9.5 pounds empty, over 10 pounds loaded. It was 43.5 inches long. For certain soldiers, officers, NCOs, vehicle crews, artillery personnel, and support troops who needed personal defense weapons but were not frontline riflemen, the Garand was excessive. The Army had issued pistols to these personnel, primarily the M1A1 45 caliber automatic, but pistols had obvious limitations in range and stopping power. The Army wanted something in between, a weapon more effective than a pistol but lighter and more compact than a rifle. In 1938, the Ordnance Department began soliciting designs for what was initially called a light rifle. The specifications were demanding. Weight under 5 pounds. Overall length under 3 feet. Semi-automatic operation. Effective range of 300 yards. Simple enough for mass production. Reliable enough for combat. Winchester Repeating Arms Company submitted a design based on a short-stroke gas piston system. The weapon fired a new cartridge, the .30 caliber carbine round, essentially a pistol cartridge lengthened and loaded to higher pressure. The bullet weighed 110 grains compared to 150 grains for the Garand's .30-06. Muzzle velocity was approximately 1900 feet per second compared to the Garand's 2800. Muzzle energy was roughly 960 foot-pounds compared to the Garand's 2700. On paper, the carbine was significantly less powerful than a standard rifle, but it met the Army's requirements. The weapon weighed just 5 pounds 2 ounces empty. Overall length was 35.5 inches. It fed from a 15-round detachable box magazine, later increased to 30 rounds when higher capacity magazines became available. Rate of fire for a trained shooter was approximately 30 aimed rounds per minute, compared to perhaps 15 for a bolt-action rifle or 25 for the Garand. The Army adopted the weapon as the M1 Carbine in September 1941. Production began immediately at multiple contractors. Winchester, of course, but also Inland Division of General Motors, Underwood Typewriter, Rock-Ola Manufacturing, Quality, Hardware, National Postal Meter, Standard Products, and IBM. The industrial mobilization was staggering. By the end of the war, American factories would produce over 6 million carbines, making it the most produced American small arm of the conflict. But for paratroopers, the carbine represented something more than a compromise weapon for second-line troops. It represented survival. The airborne divisions recognized immediately that the carbine solved problems unique to parachute infantry that conventional weapons could not address. The primary issue was weight. A paratrooper jumping into combat carried his entire world on his body: main parachute, reserve parachute, musette bag with rations, medical supplies, and personal items, entrenching tool, canteen, ammunition, grenades, often a bazooka round or mortar shell distributed among the stick to ensure heavy weapons had ammunition when squads reassembled after the drop. Every pound mattered because every pound increased the shock of landing and decreased mobility once on the ground. The M1 Garand, at 10 pounds loaded, was manageable, but awkward. Jumping with a rifle that long meant either carrying it in a special scabbard attached to the parachute harness, requiring the soldier to retrieve it after landing, or carrying it strapped across the chest where it could catch on suspension lines during the jump or slam into the jumper's face during landing. Neither option was ideal. The carbine weighed half as much. Its compact dimensions meant it could be carried across the chest with minimal interference. And critically, a paratrooper could carry twice as much ammunition for the same weight. 15 rounds of 30-06 for the Garand weighed approximately 1 pound 9 ounces. 15 rounds of carbine ammunition weighed just 12 ounces. A paratrooper could jump with 90 rounds of carbine ammunition in 6 magazines for less weight than 40 rounds of Garand ammunition in 5 clips. The airborne forces wanted more. They wanted the carbine even more compact for jumping. In May 1942, the Ordnance Department began development of a variant with a folding metal stock. The M1A1 Carbine entered production in October 1942. The folding stock used a stamped steel frame that pivoted on a hinge pin, allowing the stock to fold alongside the receiver. With stock folded, overall length dropped to approximately 25.5 inches. A paratrooper could carry the weapon secure against his chest with minimal protrusion. The 82nd Airborne Division received the first production M1A1 Carbines in early 1943 during training in North Carolina. The 101st Airborne Division received theirs shortly after. Both divisions conducted extensive field testing during training exercises at Fort Bragg and later at camps in England during the build-up to Operation Overlord. Paratroopers adapted their tactics to the weapon's characteristics. The carbine was not effective beyond 300 yards. Standard doctrine for rifle companies emphasized long-range marksmanship and fire discipline. Airborne doctrine evolved differently. Paratroopers expected to fight at close range in the chaos following a drop. Small units would be scattered across the drop zone, gathering in darkness, moving to objectives through unfamiliar terrain, often encountering enemy forces at ranges measured in tens of yards rather than hundreds. In these conditions, volume of fire mattered more than range. The ability to deliver 15 or 30 rounds rapidly mattered more than the ability to hit a target at 500 yards. The carbine's lighter recoil allowed faster follow-up shots. Its lighter weight allowed soldiers to carry more ammunition and move faster under load. The folding stock made it easier to maneuver in confined spaces, inside buildings, through hedgerows, in the close terrain of European villages, and Norman Bocage. German intelligence noted the American paratroopers carried these weapons. Reports from captured equipment and prisoner interrogations described the carbine's characteristics. But German tactical doctrine, built around the Kar98k's range and accuracy, did not adjust. The assumption remained that properly trained riflemen with bolt-action weapons firing full-power cartridges held the advantage in infantry combat. The carbine was viewed as evidence of American industrial excess producing specialty weapons of marginal utility. This assumption would be tested in the hedgerows of Normandy. The Bocage country of Normandy was perhaps the worst possible terrain for conventional infantry tactics. Centuries of Norman farmers had divided their fields with earthen berms, 4 to 6 feet high, packed solid over generations, topped with dense hedgerows of hawthorn, bramble, and trees. These barriers created a maze of small fields, each one a potential kill zone, each hedgerow a ready-made defensive position. Movement meant exposing yourself to fire from opponents you could not see until you were within meters of their position. Long-range marksmanship became irrelevant when you could not acquire targets beyond 50 yards. The advantage went to whoever could deliver more fire when contact occurred. American paratroopers discovered this immediately after the drops. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions scattered across the Cotentin Peninsula in darkness, landing miles from designated drop zones, scattered by German flak and pilot error. Small groups of paratroopers formed ad hoc units, sometimes as few as 3 or 4 men, moving toward objectives or simply toward the sound of fighting. These small units encountered German forces in conditions that negated every advantage the Kar98k provided. In a hedgerow meeting engagement at ranges of 20 to 30 yards, the German Grenadiers' superior marksmanship meant little. There was no time for careful aimed fire. There was only the immediate need to deliver suppressive fire while moving to cover or assaulting the enemy position. Staff Sergeant Malcolm Brannan of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment described an engagement near the village of Neuville-aux-Plaines on June 7, 1944. His squad of 7 paratroopers moved through a gap in a hedgerow and immediately took fire from German infantry positioned behind the next hedgerow, approximately 40 yards distant. Brannan estimated 4 to 6 Germans based on the volume of fire. The Germans fired aimed shots with their Kar98k rifles. Brannan heard the distinctive crack of Mauser fire, saw dirt kick up near his position, heard one round pass close enough to make the air snap. His squad returned fire immediately with their carbines. 7 men firing semi-automatic, each man putting rounds down range as fast as they could acquire targets through the vegetation. Brannan fired his entire 15-round magazine in approximately 8 seconds, reloaded, fired again. The other paratroopers did the same. In less than 30 seconds, the squad had fired over 200 rounds. The German fire stopped. Brannan's squad moved forward through the hedgerow and found 3 German soldiers dead, 1 wounded, and evidence of at least 2 more who had withdrawn. The wounded German, a Gefreiter, asked Brannan through a combination of broken English and gestures how many Americans had been firing. When Brannan indicated 7 men, the German seemed confused, even disbelieving. Similar engagements occurred across the Cotentin Peninsula throughout June and July 1944. German after-action reports and prisoner interrogations revealed a consistent pattern. German infantry were stunned by the volume of fire American paratroopers could deliver. The standard German infantry squad in 1944 consisted of 10 men. 8 carried Kar98k rifles. 1 carried an MP-40 submachine gun. 1 operated an MG-42 machine gun. In theory, the MG-42 provided the squad's volume firepower while riflemen delivered accurate supporting fire, but MG-42 teams were priority targets. American forces concentrated fire on machine gun positions immediately. Once the MG-42 was suppressed or eliminated, the German squad's firepower dropped dramatically to 8 bolt-action rifles firing perhaps 60 aimed rounds per minute total. An American paratrooper squad of 9 men, all carrying M1A1 carbines with 15 or 30-round magazines, could collectively fire over 200 rounds per minute sustained, more in short intensive bursts. Even accounting for accuracy degradation from rapid fire, the sheer volume was overwhelming at close range. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann of the 91st Luftlandedivision Division kept a diary throughout June 1944, portions of which survived the war and were later archived in German military records. His entry for June 9th described an engagement with American paratroopers near Corentin that revealed the psychological impact of facing carbine-armed opponents. Hartmann's squad occupied a defensive position along a sunken road when American forces approached from the north. Hartmann identified them as paratroopers by their distinctive M1A1 jump uniforms and equipment. The Americans moved in small groups through the Bocage, using cover effectively. When contact occurred, Hartmann's squad opened fire at approximately 100 meters. Hartmann wrote that he fired 4 shots, working his Kar98k bolt as trained, acquiring targets through his sights. He believed he hit one American. Then the return fire began. He described it as a continuous roar of shots that seemed impossible from infantry weapons. He initially believed the Americans had brought forward a machine gun, but the fire came from multiple positions simultaneously, more firing points than a single machine gun could explain. His squad leader ordered them to fall back to secondary positions. As they withdrew, Hartmann saw that American fire had shredded the vegetation around their position, cut down small trees, and torn apart the earthen berm they had been using for cover. The volume was unlike anything he had experienced fighting Soviet forces on the Eastern Front, where both sides primarily used bolt-action rifles. German tactical doctrine emphasized fire, discipline, and marksmanship for good reasons, rooted in logistics and training. Ammunition supply in the Wehrmacht was never as abundant as in American forces. German soldiers were taught to conserve ammunition, to make every shot count. A German infantryman typically carried 60 rounds for his Kar98k in pouches on his belt and in his pack. Resupply might not come for days, especially in the fluid combat of 1944. American paratroopers jumped with 90 to 120 rounds of carbine ammunition and expected resupply within 24 to 48 hours. When supply lines were established, ammunition was abundant. The industrial capacity that produced 6 million carbines also produced ammunition at rates German factories could not match. This abundance changed tactical thinking. American doctrine did not emphasize conserving ammunition. It emphasized fire superiority, put more rounds downrange than the enemy, suppress enemy positions, maneuver under covering fire. The carbine enabled this doctrine for airborne infantry in ways the Garand could not due to weight, and the submachine gun could not due to range limitations. German prisoners interrogated by American intelligence officers in late June and early July consistently mentioned the volume of American fire. They described feeling outgunned despite being armed with what they considered superior rifles. Some expressed confusion about American tactics. Others recognized that American industry provided advantages German forces could not match. Several stated directly that fighting American paratroopers felt qualitatively different from fighting other American infantry units, specifically because of the sustained rapid fire the paratroopers could deliver. The tactical advantages American paratroopers experienced in Normandy reflected a deeper strategic reality that went far beyond individual firefights in Norman hedgerows. The M1A1 Carbine represented American industrial capacity, applied to military problems in ways Germany simply could not match. Winchester's original production facility in New Haven, Connecticut, began carbine production in 1942. By mid-1943, the facility was producing approximately 800 carbines per day. But Winchester was only one contractor. Inland Division, a subsidiary of General Motors that normally produced automotive steering mechanisms, converted its production lines to carbines. At peak production, Inland was manufacturing 1,500 carbines daily. Underwood Typewriter Company, which had never manufactured firearms before the war, retooled completely for carbine production. Rock-Ola Manufacturing, primarily known for jukeboxes, produced over 300,000 carbines, IBM, International Business Machines, devoted factory space to carbine production between manufacturing calculating machines and military fire control equipment. The total production across all contractors reached approximately 6.3 million carbines by war's end. Germany produced approximately 14.6 million Kar98k rifles during the entire war, from 1935 to 1945, across multiple factories, including Mauser, Sauer, Steyr, and others. That production supported the entire Wehrmacht, including all branches and all theaters. American carbine production, 6.3 million units in less than 4 years, equipped primarily second-line, troops, vehicle crews, and specialized units like airborne divisions. The ammunition production disparity was even more stark. Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Missouri, built specifically for small arms ammunition production, manufactured over 6 billion rounds of carbine ammunition during the war. Western Cartridge Company produced billions more. American forces never faced ammunition shortages for the carbine. Supply dumps in Normandy held millions of rounds. Resupply came regularly, often daily once logistics lines were established. German ammunition production struggled throughout the war with raw material shortages, particularly copper for cartridge cases and primers. By late 1944, quality control was degrading as manufacturers substituted materials and simplified manufacturing processes to maintain output. American ammunition remained consistent in quality and abundant in quantity. This industrial disparity manifested in tactical behavior. American paratroopers could afford to fire carbines on semi-automatic, putting rounds downrange to suppress enemy positions even without clear targets. German Grenadiers conserved ammunition, fired only when they had identified targets, and worried constantly about resupply. The psychological impact of these different material conditions was profound. A captured German officer from the 352nd Infantry Division, interrogated in July 1944, told American intelligence that his men felt they were fighting an enemy who could waste ammunition because they had unlimited supplies. He described watching American paratroopers fire what he estimated as hundreds of rounds in brief engagements, then withdraw, leaving spent brass scattered across the ground. His own troops carefully collected spent cartridge cases for eventual reloading if brass became scarce enough. The officer understood the strategic implications. Germany was fighting a war of scarcity against an enemy, with abundance. The carbine was not just a weapon, it was evidence of American industrial superiority translated into tactical advantage. Every paratrooper carrying a carbine with multiple loaded magazines represented factory capacity, supply chain efficiency, and resource availability that Germany could not match. The airborne divisions expanded carbine usage through the summer of 1944. Initially issued primarily to officers, NCOs, and specialists, the carbine increasingly equipped entire squads and platoons. By the time of Operation Market Garden in September 1944, many airborne rifle companies had carbines as the primary weapon, with Garands relegated to designated marksmen. Operation Market Garden in September 1944 provided another testing ground for the carbine in airborne operations. The 101st Airborne Division dropped near Eindhoven with orders to secure bridges along the corridor to Arnhem. The 82nd Airborne dropped near Nijmegen with similar objectives. Both divisions were now extensively equipped with M1A1 Carbines. The fighting around Nijmegen demonstrated the carbine's effectiveness in urban combat. Paratroopers clearing buildings, fighting room to room, found the carbine's compact dimensions and rapid fire superior to longer rifles. Staff Sergeant Roy Creek of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment later described clearing a German-held factory building with his squad. The folding stock allowed him to maneuver through doorways and narrow corridors while keeping the weapon at ready. The 15-round magazine meant he could engage multiple targets without reloading. Creek's squad encountered German defenders armed with Kar-98k rifles in the factory's third floor. The close-quarters engagement lasted perhaps 2 minutes. The paratroopers' carbines delivered overwhelming fire in the confined space. The Germans, unable to effectively work bolt-action rifles in rapid, close-range combat, surrendered. Creek noted that the German soldiers seemed almost relieved to be out of the fight. One spoke enough English to say the Americans fired so fast they thought they were facing automatic weapons. By December 1944, when German forces launched their offensive in the Ardennes, American airborne doctrine had fully integrated the carbine. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at Bastogne, relied heavily on carbines during the defensive fighting. The weapon's light weight allowed soldiers to carry more ammunition during patrols and counterattacks in the frozen forests around the town. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard, operations officer for the 101st at Bastogne, later noted in his after-action reports that ammunition resupply by airdrop included substantial quantities of carbine ammunition, specifically because so many soldiers were now carrying the weapon. The carbine had evolved from a specialist weapon to a standard infantry arm for airborne forces. German forces facing the paratroopers at Bastogne included Volksgrenadier divisions, newly raised units with abbreviated training. These soldiers, many of them young conscripts or older reservists, were equipped with Kar98k rifles and given basic marksmanship instruction. When they encountered American paratroopers in the woods around Bastogne, the experience paralleled what German regulars had faced in Normandy months earlier. Unteroffizier Franz Gockel, captured on December 23 near Foy, told interrogators that his squad had been pinned down by what he estimated as 10 to 15 Americans firing continuously. When informed that probably fewer than 6 paratroopers had engaged his 12-man squad, Gockel initially disbelieved it. The volume of fire seemed impossible from so few men. German tactical doctrine never effectively adapted to the reality of facing carbine-armed paratroopers. The Kar98k remained the standard German infantry rifle through war's end. German forces developed Sturmgewehr assault rifles that would have addressed the firepower disparity, but production numbers remained minimal. Fewer than 500,000 SG-44 assault rifles were produced compared to millions of Kar98k rifles. The reasons were partly industrial. Germany lacked the production capacity to replace millions of rifles with a new weapon system while simultaneously producing tanks, aircraft, artillery, and other war materials. But the reasons were also doctrinal. German military leadership remained committed to marksmanship-centered tactics, even as combat experience demonstrated the value of volume fire at close range. American forces, by contrast, embraced the lessons. The carbine influenced post-war development of infantry weapons. The concept of a lightweight, compact, semi-automatic weapon with a detachable high-capacity magazine became the foundation for future assault rifle designs. The M2 selective fire carbine, capable of full automatic fire, entered limited production in 1945, though it saw little combat use before war's end. When the war ended in May 1945, American forces had produced over 6.3 million carbines. Approximately 1.4 million were the M1A1 folding stock variant. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions had been equipped almost entirely with carbines by war's end. The weapon that started as a compromise solution for second-line troops had become the primary arm of elite airborne infantry. German soldiers returning from captivity after the war carried with them memories of facing American firepower. Interviews conducted by German military historians in the 1950s and 60s consistently noted former soldiers mentioning the volume of American fire. The carbine featured prominently in these recollections, often described as a weapon that seemed to fire endlessly compared to the Kar98k's measured pace. The psychological impact went beyond tactical considerations. German soldiers had been trained to believe in the superiority of German equipment and doctrine. The Kar98k was not just a rifle, it was a symbol of German precision engineering and military professionalism. To be overwhelmed by American paratroopers carrying what German doctrine classified as an inferior weapon challenged fundamental assumptions about German military superiority. Some German veterans recognized the industrial implications. They understood that American forces could afford to issue millions of specialized weapons because American factories could produce them in quantities Germany could never match. Others focused on tactical lessons, recognizing that doctrine emphasizing long-range marksmanship was less relevant in close-quarters combat, where rapid fire determined outcomes. A few remained convinced that German tactics were superior, and that only material shortages and numerical disadvantages explained defeat. For American paratroopers, the carbine became iconic. Post-war airborne units retained the weapon through the late 1940s and into the Korean War. Veterans returning home often spoke of the carbine with the same affection. Artillerymen spoke of their guns or tankers of their vehicles. The weapon had done what it was designed to do. It kept them alive. It gave them advantages in combat. It worked when they needed it. Staff Sergeant Robert Murphy, who jumped into Normandy in the pre-dawn darkness of June 6, 1944, carried his M1A1 Carbine through France, into Holland during Market Garden, and through the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge. He survived the war and kept a photograph of himself in jump gear, carbine across his chest, taken in England before the Normandy invasion. In interviews decades later, Murphy would say the carbine was the right weapon for the job. Light enough to jump with, reliable enough to trust, fast enough to win firefights. The Hedgerow encounter south of Sainte-Mère-Église that Murphy survived in June 1944 was not recorded in official records as a significant engagement. No after-action report documented it in detail. It was one of thousands of small firefights across Normandy that summer, but it represented the reality of what American airborne forces discovered and what German forces learned painfully. In close-quarters combat, under conditions where paratroopers fought, the lightweight carbine's rapid fire overwhelmed the Kar98k's range and precision. The German Grenadiers who withdrew from that hedgerow after facing Murphy's squad believed they had encountered a superior force. They had not. They had encountered 7 American paratroopers with a weapon optimized for exactly the kind of fighting that occurred in Normandy Bocage. The irony was profound. German doctrine, built around a superb bolt-action rifle and emphasizing marksmanship and fire discipline, met American doctrine built around industrial abundance and firepower superiority. The Kar98k was objectively the better rifle for long-range precision fire, but modern infantry combat, particularly in the close terrain of European villages, forests, and hedgerows, rewarded rapid fire and quick handling more than long-range accuracy. The paratroopers jumping into Normandy with folding stock carbines represented a philosophical shift in infantry warfare. Weight mattered more than range. Volume of fire mattered more than precision. Reliability and simplicity mattered more than theoretical maximum performance. These were lessons learned through experience, refined through combat, and validated by survival. When the sun set on June 6, 1944, thousands of American paratroopers were scattered across Normandy, gathering in darkness, moving toward objectives with carbines across their chests. Thousands of German Grenadiers manned defensive positions with Kar98k rifles, confident in their weapons and training. By the time Normandy was secured weeks later, those German soldiers who survived had learned that confidence based on doctrine could not overcome material reality. The Americans had more of everything: more ammunition, more weapons, more industrial capacity, and they had designed their infantry weapons to exploit that abundance. The M1A1 Carbine, dismissed by some military theorists as an underpowered compromise, proved itself in the only test that mattered. It kept soldiers alive in combat. It gave them tactical advantages. It worked. And in war, that is the only measure that counts. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.